It's 7:05 and we have 100 participants here who have joined us this evening, so that's really awesome. And let's get going. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening. But before we get going, I just need to say that a recording of tonight's event will be made available to the public by our sponsoring organizations through our websites and social media. Other recordings of this event, whether they be in person or of a computer screen, may not be used without the express written approval of the League of Women Voters. And the League will only allow audio video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by the media reporting on this event. My name is Meredith Reed. I am a member of the League of Women Voters. And on behalf of the League and our co-hosting organizations, which is the Better Utah Institute, the ACLU of Utah, Action Utah, the NAACP Salt Lake branch, and the Utah Black Roundtable, I'd like to welcome all of you and our panelists. The purpose of our event this evening is to provide an opportunity for informed civil discourse on policing reform and to discuss these ideas and proposals, including the issue of defunding the police, a slogan and policy that has been pushed in recent months with activists. Locally, there's been a range of opinions on what policing reform should look like, and our panelists are here tonight to help explore and explain some of the reforms that have been proposed. They will dive into these questions around these topics and consider what positive reforms in Utah might look like. We anticipate this being the first event in a series of discussions and would like to continue these conversations after the election and into the legislative season. I'll be the moderator for the evening. I also have Jason Stevenson from the ACLU helping with questions that we've received through the RSVPs for the event, which we had a number of, which is amazing. And we'll also be using the Q&A function. It's down on the right-hand side of your Zoom screen. It's the farthest right icon for me, probably the same for you. If you have questions that you would like, please use the Q&A function if you're an attendee. Jason will be keeping track on those, and we will try to get to some of the questions from the audience later on in our conversation. On our panel this evening, we have Jeanetta Williams. She's the president of the NAACP Salt Lake branch and the Tri-State Conference of Idaho, Nevada, and Utah. We have Tom Ross. He's the president of the Utah Chiefs of Police Association, and he's also the Bountiful Police Chief. We have Chris Warton, who is on the Summit County, I'm sorry, I live in Summit County, my fault, sorry, Salt Lake County Council. He's the chair. And we have Jade, who is an organizer for Utah Against Police Brutality. We're going to begin with an opening statement from each of the panelists and giving them about 3 minutes per panelist. And we've asked them to briefly describe their organization's position on police reform. And we do have a 3-minute time limit so that we can keep the conversation moving. I'll give you getting short if you're looking at your screen so that we can keep things moving along. After the introductions, we'll have 2 questions that all of the panelists have already received ahead of time. So it's a conversation and it's asking them what their organizations need from each other to attain their vision for reform. And I'll address that again before we get into it. And then also we're going to ask them what reform efforts, sort of buckets of how to approach reform efforts. So let's get started. Chief Ross, you want to kick it off?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here from the League of Women Voters and to be able to represent the Utah Chiefs of Police Association. We're an organization with 109 police chiefs. We're local government, law enforcement, which is obviously an important voice in these discussions. And because there's 109 chiefs and different law enforcement agencies and cities that they work in, there isn't one point of view that I'm able to express as I'm speaking as the president at this point. And our efforts to date have been to meet with anyone that has concerns or issues, and with police reform, ask questions that are being asked on how law enforcement deals with people of color, and certainly the equity and disparities that have been raised. And we're trying to, as an organization working with the League of Cities and Towns, we're trying to gather as much information, what the recommendations are, what the proposed solutions are, so that we can take that back to our membership and law enforcement as a whole, and start looking for ways to improve our relationship with our communities.
Thank you. Jeanetta?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to the League of Women Voters and all of the audience there today. The NAACP, our mission is to secure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and ensure the health and well-being of all persons. The NAACP, we were founded in 1909, and we're the oldest civil rights organization in the country, celebrating this year 111 years in existence. Our president and CEO is Derek Johnson, and our chairman of the board is Leon Russell. We have 64 national board of directors, and we're a very structured organization. Some of the things that the NAACP had called for after the murder of George Floyd and the killing of Ahmaud Arbery while simply jogging, and other murders of Black and even little 12-year-old Tamir Rice in Ohio, called for different things. We talk about police reform, but the NAACP headquarters had issued a call to all of our local branches across the country. And what they said was that we need federal, state, and local reforms which impose strict police accountability, limit the use of force, eliminate racial profiling, demilitarize law enforcement, track and report data, and ensure proper screening, education, and training of all officers, and to eliminate chokeholds. And another issue for us here in Utah was to also push for diverse and gender law enforcement, recruitment and screening for racial and ethnic minorities and women. So those are some of the things that we've been looking at and working toward, and have had numerous meetings about. Thank you.
Thank you, Jade. Will you give us your organization's thoughts?
Had to unmute myself there. Good evening. I am grateful to be joining this important discussion tonight and representing Utah Against Police Brutality. We were formed in, sorry, my husband's adjusting this mic here. We were formed as an open democratic organization in September 2014. Our mission has been to end police brutality, fight for justice for the victims and the families of those who have been impacted by police brutality and police killings, and to campaign for community control of the police through implementation of independent democratically elected civilian review boards for local police departments. These civilian review boards would have the real power to collect data on policing, to investigate police misconduct, and recommend disciplinary measures to the chiefs of police in those departments, and would be empowered to actually have a say in policy and training and discipline of the police. While we support other reforms that offer potential harm reduction in policing, such as body cameras and use of less lethal weapons and additional training efforts, such as the de-escalation training, racial bias, and diversity awareness trainings, we believe that, and history has shown us that those reform measures are not enough to put an end to the use of excessive force, racist profiling, and police killings, or that other forms of police brutality. such as the harassment of our unsheltered community members. Utah Against Police Brutality operates as an affiliate of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, an organization with branches nationwide, coast to coast, that are also organizing in their localities for community control of the police. Community control is not about reforming necessarily a broken, corrupt, and racist institutions, but it's about ending the police's role as an occupying force in our communities. We're fighting to affirm our inalienable rights, democratic right of the people to decide how we are policed. We stand by our belief that communities should have a say in what public safety looks like, to hold officers accountable for violent actions and prevent the loss of human life and violent incidents such as the one in Rose Park last week, where Lyndon Cameron, an autistic child, was shot while running away after his parents called for a intervention mental health crisis situation. And we too often have seen abuses without accountability. In some cases, we've seen families, sorry, lost my spot there. Too many people have been killed in our cities, communities, and neighborhoods by police, never receiving their right to the due process under the law. Too often, we've seen Black and brown men profiled and murdered by police and at disproportionate rates, especially here in Utah, where it is more like one of the highest national averages
Jade.
of disproportionate killings.
Thanks, Jade.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, guys. I'm trying to give you
time beforehand. I'm sorry. I just, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure we get to everyone. Chris, can you please give us your introduction statement?
Thank you. Sure. So I'm Chris Warton, and I'm representing the Salt Lake City Council. Salt Lake City is the capital city of Utah and the largest city in Utah. The position, well, let me start with this caveat. I don't have a prepared statement that from the whole council, so I'm speaking to you today, even though I currently serve as the chair of the council. I'm giving you my position and my observations of where I believe the council is. So don't take any of my statements as the official position of the council as a whole, but my observation from my colleagues on the council, and certainly the way that I feel, is that police reform is necessary, that Salt Lake City has been a leader for the state of Utah and for many other cities in police reform measures. We want to continue to be a leader in that position, and we do not want to rest on our accomplishments of the past. Our goal is to build a city where all residents feel safe and protected. Some of the current measures that the council is working on is demilitarizing the police, preventing use of decommissioned military equipment, increasing civilian oversight through our Police Civilian Review Board, elevating Black and brown voices and bringing those voices that have traditionally marginalized communities to the table to hear their suggestions on what they feel like Salt Lake City could do better. And we do that through our Commission on Racial Equity in Policing, and then also using our policy and budgetary authority to prevent crime from the start and to build safer communities, which includes more affordable housing, more access to mental health resources, resources for drug treatment, and just addressing systemic poverty in general to try to build a more equitable city. I'll also note that while there have been a lot of calls for defunding the police or even abolishing the police, that there are a number of state laws that regulate what Salt Lake City can and cannot do as a municipality within the state of Utah. For example, we are required as what's designated as a first-class city under Utah law to have a police force and a police chief. So we have to operate within that barrier in addition to a number of other state laws. We're interested in making all the reforms that we can with under the existing law.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
I just want to remind folks, if you've joined us recently, that we are taking questions from the audience, from our participants. Oops, sorry, that's my timer. I apologize. But we're using the Q&A function, which is down on the right-hand side of your Zoom controls. So if you have a question that comes up for you as you're listening to our panelists, please feel free to submit that through the Q&A. So our first question for the conversation this evening is to ask each of the representatives here. I'm giving you guys 2 minutes, and then if something comes up for you to respond to, I'm giving other folks 30 seconds to respond. And you can just throw your hand up, or there is a raise hand function in Zoom if you want to use it, or wave at me, and I'll make sure that we get you in there. But what do your organizations need from each other to attain your vision for reform? So the purpose of this is to have a conversation. And so what are each of you looking for from the other organizations that are here to help achieve reform? Jeanetta, you want to start us off?
Sure, I can do that. One of the things that, or several of the things that the NAACP would look for in different organizations and groups is to better understand exactly what it is that the NAACP that we're asking for, and come to the table and discuss different issues. And for one organization may not want to agree with the NAACP, but I think what we need to do is come together to look at different issues and different situations. When people are saying defund the police, that's not what the NAACP has been asking for. So those type of things that people need to kind of better understand, what the NAACP is and what we do. And we are a nonpartisan organization. And again, like I said, we are very structured. We've been around since 1909, 111 years. And so we want folks to be able to, come to the table and work with us and have open discussions.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to respond to what organizations need from each other to attain their vision for reform?
Sure. I don't want to tell other organizations like how to advocate, but I would say sort of what I mentioned earlier, that a lot of citizens and advocacy groups tend to look at Salt Lake City and think that we have sort of unlimited authority to regulate our police department, and that is not entirely accurate. That there are a lot of things that we do in partnership with the county, such as the jail, such as providing mental health treatment, and then there are a lot of state laws that sort of provide perimeters for what cities can do. So it really depends on the specific issue that we're talking about in policing, and whether or not that is something that the city can do on its own, or whether it's something that is required, that requires intervention at multiple levels of government. But we, as the city council, are always open to dialoguing with residents, pointing them to hear what their concerns are, what they would like to see out of their police department, and then also directing them to those county and state contacts to when it's an issue that is not entirely within Salt Lake City's authority, or that we can't do without those other levels of government.
Great, thank you. Jade, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I would say our organization, we are an organization that's built in the community, that's made up of people, right, and mobilizing the community around an issue. And so we need that support, and like the so I'd say like those who have influence, have a position where they, you know, are speaking to people in the public and talking to them, like referring them to, or learning about themselves and then referring them to information around what community control means, like what an independent civilian review board would do for policing, how that would empower the people in our community to have a say in what public safety looks like and what interactions we want to see in our community and how we protect each other as community members, but also have, you know, government like agents like in our community and what their role is and what it should be. And so yeah, using that, any influence that you all have to like or to support that movement. And I think learning about each other is really important. Right now we have a huge task of working at a state level to try to repeal a bill, HB 415, which, you know, I know that Utah Chiefs of Police spoke in favor of passing that bill. And I would say, you know, to reevaluate the reasons around that. Like we're fighting for democratic rights, for the democratic rights of our communities to have a say democratically in how our communities are policed and how we are looking out for each other and keeping one another safe. And if you have the ability to push for repeal of HB 415 or to have more conversations around that, or would like more information, to reach out about it, to like discuss that with people in your organization, in your groups, and to talk about how that could benefit our communities.
Thanks, Jade. Chief Ross, can you please share with us what your organization needs from others to attain their vision of reform?
Yes, thank you. First off, just the comments that I've been listening to from the other presenters is very important for us as in law enforcement to understand, number one, what the ask is, what different groups or different people, the interests of different people, our communities in general, what they want us to do. You know, the more folks that we've met with and the more groups that we've been gathering information from, not everyone's on the same page. So even as you talk about, somebody will use the comment or the term defunding police, that can mean something very different from one group to the next. For some, it could mean abolishing a particular department completely and starting over. For others, it means maybe just taking money that could be better spent in a social service program and not have the police have to take on that responsibility. And so it's very important for us to meet with as many groups and representatives as we can, legislators, especially our legislators of color, which we've been doing as well, and making sure that we understand the asks. As Councilman Warton referred to earlier, Salt Lake City has done things that's specific to what they believe their community wants and needs, and the department's responding to that. Salt Lake City's Chief Brown is a member of our association, and other cities throughout the state, 245 roughly, have different things that they may be doing or are doing, trying to bridge the gaps that exist. So my hope for my involvement as the president is that working with as many people as we can in a collaborative effort, bringing all the issues together, finding out where there's support for what issues and concerns, where there's not, and then we have significant discussions as law enforcement trying to make the change and evolve our profession to meet the needs of our communities. And by the way, if I can say that this isn't something that's just started. We didn't just start wanting to listen to our communities or have conversations. We may not be perfect, I get that, and some may do a better job than others, but there's been a lot of advocacy and a lot of reaching out to our communities for several years. Law enforcement does not set policy and does not set law. Our legislators, our elected officials, they do that. And our responsibility is to try to, within those parameters and federal, state, and local laws, police our communities fairly, equitably, and keeping our communities secure. And there's always room for improvement. We understand that, and we are listening and engaged in this.
Thank you, Chief Ross. Does anybody want to respond to any of the topics or issues that were brought up by other panelists?
Sure, I will. And going back on what Chief Ross had said, the NAACP, we've had working relationships with the chief and other chiefs across the state on just a lot of different issues, even back in 2014 when we had a lot of the law enforcement and chief of police come together in a tri-state conference that was held in Layton, in fact. And at that one, we had asked for body cameras for all police officers. And of course, we knew that there's a lot of police departments that don't have the funds to have each officer with body cameras. And so we had a legislator that presented a bill, and the governor set aside some funds to have body cameras for all police officers. And that was great, and we applauded the governor for doing that. But then when they have the footage, then they need to have funds to make sure that they can store all of the footage that they have. And so that's another thing right now that, you know, we want to try to help the police officers and police departments to try to see where maybe we can come up with some federal funding so they can have adequate monies to store the footage that they get when they're out on patrol. So those are some of the things that I wanted to say, that we have and continue to have a great working relationship. So this isn't just something new for us either. We've had it ongoing for a number of years, for years.
Thank you. Councilman Warton, do you have?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add that input from the public is so critical to this, and I think I talked earlier about how we're trying to elevate Black, brown voices and voices of community members who've been traditionally marginalized or targeted by police, or they don't feel that police protect them. And I also want to ask people out there that, you know, we've seen a lot of protests and demonstrations in Salt Lake City, which I think is absolutely, you know, important and critical, and that is the First Amendment right of our residents. So I don't want this answer to be viewed as discouraging or that in any way. But I do hope that people who are going to these rallies and who are willing to attend these protests will help us move not just from the protests, but move into the policy-making realm. Mm-hmm. We need people that are willing. I mean, it's one thing to show up for a protest, which is important, but it's another thing to have people write their elected officials, engage with us when we say these are the policies that we're thinking about, asking for public input, and then engaging with us, you know, to share your stories, individual stories of residents, what you've experienced. We can't do this. We can't just go from protest to having these large-scale changes. There's a process of how we make public policy and how we make sure that that public policy addresses the needs that it's intended to and minimizes unintended consequences that it may have. And we really are at a point right now where we need people that have these strong feelings and stories to be able to move with us out of the protest realm or stay in the protest realm, but also move with us into the public engagement realm and the policymaking realm.
Exactly. And that's so true, because when the protests first started and they had the burning of the police car, the NAACP, we called for calm and said people to go home because people do have a right to protest, and we can say, yes, they can do that, but do it in a way that's not destructive, and come to the table and let's talk about different issues and what can we do to make things better. So when they're protesting, we're saying, don't do destructive, don't destroy property. There's a way to do things, and one of the things that the NAACP did, we've always done voter registration and with the League of Women Voters for many, many years. And one of the things we have is bookmarks, and we have bookmarks on one side and then census information on the other side. So we want people to not only, we have somebody that maybe go to the protest and they can pass these out, distribute them to folks, but saying, okay, if you have a lot of interest in what's going on, you need to make sure that you're registered and then go and vote. Another issue is about the census. We want to make sure that people fill out and complete it, because they had them where they can do it and mail it in, but now you can do it online, and that's very effective. And we have a brochure that we had printed up, and it's a trifold, and it's how to do and interact with police. When the police come to your home, what do you do? If you're being asked questions, what do you do? All of the different things that you can talk to police officers on and not be, not be in an argumentative mode, but make sure that you're interacting and know what your rights are. And so those are some of the things, because so often, people just for some reason, of course, they see a police officer and then they do, get frightened and, why am I being stopped, or what am I asking, or what questions do I need to respond to? And so with this little brochure, we'll kind of give them a little more details of actually what to do. We started this brochure back in roughly 1998, maybe, with our NAACP national headquarters and our legal department. And then other folks have, printed it or revised it in their own way. But the NAACP, for us here in Salt Lake City, we had our attorneys look over it and make sure that all of the information was accurate. And then working even with some police officers to say, this is what we're going to give out to folks. Do you have a problem with the language, what's in it? And they said, no, it was all good. So we want to make sure that we continue to work with folks and want to make sure that people know how to interact with police and not be confrontational.
Thanks, Jeanetta. Jade or Chief Ross, do you guys have any response to the conversation that we've been having around getting involved in organizations before we move on to our next question? I just want to give you guys a chance to chime in.
No, I think that exactly what's being said, that we need to hear from our communities. We need to hear what their wants are, what their concerns are, what their fears are, what the needs are. And as we go through this process, which is really an evolution of where does law enforcement fit into the needs and the issues that are happening, some of those things we may remove from law enforcement. There may be other groups that are better, situated and trained to handle that. In others, law enforcement is the only, group that can come in and deal with those types of situations. We're willing to have those, in Davis County, you may or may not be aware, but the receiving center program that we started, that was brought by law enforcement. That was the chiefs and sheriff and in Davis County coming together with Davis Behavioral Health, starting a program that does not require criminal charges so individuals can be taken to a center to get help immediately, substance use, mental health, alcohol abuse. And we do not even send a report to the court as long as the individual is trying to get help. That's a very positive program. It's had a huge benefit to roughly now 350 individuals that we brought in, and we just started this in December. So law enforcement can be part of the answer and should be at the table, and will bring ideas forward that will revolutionize what we do in our communities. And I think if we work together as partners and are willing to sit down even over tough discussions and things that we're passionate about and maybe that we're afraid of at times, I think we can do good things and do what's in the best interest.
Thank you. Just another quick reminder to folks, I see some things popping up in the Q&A. So if you have a question that our conversation sparks for you, please feel free to put it in the Q&A in Zoom. And so we're going to move on to our next question for the panel. Reform efforts tend to fall into two categories: de-escalation efforts to prevent incidents and accountability efforts to respond to incidents. Which category do you think deserves the most focus and resources, and why? And Councilman Warren, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think obviously both are important, especially while we are trying to build more just and equitable communities. I mean, that takes time. There's no policy that you can enact within a couple weeks or months or even one election cycle that builds that society that focuses on prevention. And so we have to address, while we're making those changes on preventing these more systemic issues, we also have to focus on how we're addressing them in the short term. But I think certainly, I think as a society, we've done more focusing on addressing how to deal with crime after it's already happened. And I think that we're seeing some of the things that we're seeing right now as a result of not making more investments on how do we prevent crime from happening in the first place. And the answers, they're difficult questions, and the answers are difficult to achieve, and they require, if we talk about systemic poverty or intergenerational poverty, education, mental health resources, housing, all of those things are huge questions, but they all have a major impact on crime. And those are things that take a lot of time to develop. So I think both are important, but I'm glad to see, I think now that people are more interested in these types of issues and in policing issues. I hope that we'll see more of an investment in those things and more of a focus on those things that actually go towards preventing crime from happening in the first place, rather than trying to address the effects of criminality through our criminal justice system on the back end. Oh, Meredith, you're muted.
It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting.
Right.
I was saying, sorry, Jade, what are your thoughts on de-escalation and versus accountability, or those two sides of that?
Yeah, as a group like Utah Against Police Brutality, we generally focus on accountability. We think, efforts towards de-escalation and doing everything we can to reduce harm or potential harm and brutality is beneficial. And, we support those efforts being made by organizations and individuals and other groups. We also feel, though, that, a lot of resources and investment has gone into additional training for police, into body cam, into a lot of preventative measures. And there have been it hasn't curbed the number of police killings or the other rates as much as you would hope or we would like with that type of investment. Also, as a community, we don't have any say in what that training looks like. We can go and have meetings with our local departments, but there isn't like a standard standard for what that training would look like for diversity training and de-escalation training. And if we don't even know what that means, if it's like, an hour of training a year, or if it's this that they add, like how beneficial is that going to be? But what we do know is that people have been killed by police or hurt by police, and that less than 1% of those critical incidents in Utah have ever led to any kind of charges on those police officers, regardless of the situation or what's happened. It could be a young guy in cosplay who was killed by police in Saratoga Springs. We saw that with Darian Hunt. We also see Patrick Harmon, who was, riding his bicycle after dark, was stopped by Salt Lake City police and killed for in a situation that could have been de-escalated and did not need to lead to that kind of death. And because we work a lot with families of those who have lost loved ones in those violent incidents, we want to see more accountability and efforts towards that. And I know that there are also, you know, legal challenges and obstacles that we need to overcome and look at, like qualified immunity. And is that something that is serving our public? Is that something that, you know, we want to be part of our law? Is that something that is benefiting us? And so we would like to see more accountability and
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, super. Thank you for your answer. Chief Ross, would you like to weigh in on de-escalation and accountability?
Yes. You know, it's been interesting as I've listened to my other three colleagues present. And I'm thinking about the law enforcement world, and there's so little about our world that we're able to focus on just one thing or another. That the balance is so critical. So for example, you know, when we're talking about police accountability, certainly there's some situations that have been brought forward where people may feel that the police did not do things correctly. Others may feel that it was done correctly. At the end of the day, each of the agencies that are involved with those incidents have to be accountable for that. If there's ways to improve that, we should be improving it. If there's ways to educate what police do, then we should be providing that education. When you ask me about holding people accountable at the end versus what we do on the front end, de-escalation, maybe being able to put things in place to avoid even having someone criminalized, that's powerful too. Because if we can avoid people going down that hole and pushing them down, especially those with substance use problems and mental health issues, I think all of us agree here that there's got to be a better way that we can address those needs. I can't say as a police chief that I can focus on one thing more than the other. And then I have to also mix into that the officers and their families and crime in the community and the safety of the community. There's not many people in this world that are directly accountable to people for the actions of the job they do. And we can talk about making changes and reform, which I love that conversation because I think law enforcement is more than willing to have those discussions and lead out in many areas of change. But I also, if it puts more people at risk, they're going to be calling me directly. They're not calling everyone else. If I have an officer whose family or the officer believes that their life now is more in danger, I have to be accountable to them as well. And I think that's part of why law enforcement moves maybe slower than people want, is we're always worried about unintended consequences. Not to say that's right, but I think there's just a pressure, you know, at night when you're laying your head down on your pillow, that did we make the right decisions today and save lives and hopefully help those lives. And I get that those that disagree with the actions we've taken, whether we did right or wrong, and felt that there was a better way to handle it, I understand that what I'm saying to you doesn't do justice. That's not sufficient. But in my world, it has to be a part of that conversation. We have to do this balanced. We need officers, men and women of all races, gender, sexual orientation. We need everyone in our profession responding on those calls when you dial 911. And I'm trying to desperately, as a leader of an organization, to make sure that we can balance all of that and still make the changes that make our communities feel better, safer, listened to, more equitable, and we're not marginalizing. And these are important conversations.
Thank you, Chief. Jeanetta.
Yes, both topics are extremely important. De-escalation is very important because when we look at different situations that police officers have to face, and you know, we can't be so judgmental about what's going on in a person's mind or what's going on with the police officers as well. So being judgmental on both sides, it's something that people need to kind of step back on. I would just say that de-escalation training to police officers, it's extremely important, and not just someone coming in thinking that they can train the officers without, really knowing what they're doing. A professional person coming in and doing this training. As far as accountability, yes, we want to make sure that there's accountability, making sure that when incidents happen, that the police officers are making their reports and making them accurate reporting, where everything is transparent. So the transparency, accountability, and de-escalation goes hand in hand. So we do need to have all of that.
Thank you. So Jason Stevenson from the ACLU has been reviewing our questions from the audience, and I think he has one to share.
Yeah, there's been many great questions coming through. Everything from, what is de-escalation training like, to what is the role of police unions and police associations. What I've tried to do is find a question that a lot of people asked. And so this one, Will, Steve, Tim, Rita, and Sina all touched on in their questions. And that is, it's about the sort of scope of reform and how to make impact. Since there are over 100 police departments across the state, how can reform happen at a statewide level if most of the policies and training is organized at the local level? Should people interested in these issues focus on municipalities and city councils, or try to make change at the Utah legislature at the state level?
Who'd like to go first? Okay.
You want me to respond to that?
Go for it. I mean, all of you can, but Chief Ross, what are your thoughts?
Both at the state level and the local level is extremely important. So there are certain things that in order for us to do it equitably and fairly and making sure that everyone's participating, they will have to be done at a state level. But what's interesting is you hear this all the time, whether you're talking about federal government versus state government versus local government and big corporations versus smaller. There's also a very strong sense of belief and feeling that the best decisions are made at closest to the people at the local level. And in our association, which is why we support, city by city at times, making decisions that they feel best represent the needs of their community, and look at that as the best option. And at the same time, there's legislation that obviously we're talking about now. For example, there may be something with use of force that we as a state and as communities across this state feel that we need to set a different standard. That may be better accomplished at a state level. So we're looking to be involved in both sides of it. And I would tell individuals that to talk to your elected officials at the local level, talk to your legislators at the state level, and share your ideas and concerns. But I don't believe at the end of the day that it will be one form that we're able to solve these issues. It's going to have to be both.
Yes. I agree with the chief as well, too, because when we can talk to our legislators, which we have been doing, and making sure that we can get some legislation that's going to be beneficial to everybody concerned, I think it'll be a win-win situation all the way around. Some of the things that when people are looking at different laws and making sure, say for instance, with the district attorney, if they're looking at a police shooting, and there's the laws that the district attorney has to look at and make his ruling for. And so if people want the rulings to be different, then they're going to have to change the laws are going to have to be different. And so those are some of the things that people need to really take into consideration, and make sure that they can talk to their legislators and try to work and try to make sure that they're not going to have a win-win situation all the time, but make sure that they need to go in to a situation where they can make compromises.
Councilman Warton, Jade? Thoughts?
Thank you. I'm happy to go next, or Jade, go ahead. Whichever. Okay. So I think it really depends on the issue. Like, if you're talking about, so the short answer is both. But as Jeanetta said, if it's something like, what is justified use of force, and are officers justified in using this from a legal standpoint, or should charges be brought against them for excessive use of force? That's something that only can happen on a state level. A city can't set its own, a city could set its own standard for what is justified in terms of force for their own internal discipline of an officer, but a city can't say, for Salt Lake City, for example, the use of force is justified at this point, and the DA has to pursue criminal charges against an officer if they don't meet this standard. That's a state statute that can only happen at the state level. But then you have something like a police civilian review board. Most cities in Utah don't have a police civilian review board, even though they're authorized to. So if you in your community want to have more input on your police department, start by asking and finding out if your community has a police civilian review board, and if they don't, then form one. Talk with your mayor and your city council about how to do that. So that's really, I hate to give a complicated answer, because I know that there's a lot of energy and a lot of willingness to go out and try to make these changes. But because they can be so complicated, it kind of comes down to issue by issue about which one is more of a state issue and which one is more of a local issue.
Thanks. And Jade, I'll let you to wrap it up for this topic.
I'd say, anytime you're looking at changing those policies and laws at any level, to look at groups or people in your area who are doing that. I think you're going to be a lot more effective generally if you can join another organization or group that already has something in process, and you can work towards the same goals. Otherwise, if there's nothing in your area, maybe find other people to collaborate with you. But as far as we as an organization, Utah Against Police Brutality, have primarily been in Salt Lake County, and localized even more to Salt Lake City generally. And we've done a lot on the local level, and including, fighting for that civilian, independent, democratically elected civilian review board. And then, had the state come down with a law that prohibited us from being able to create that at a local level. So you do have to keep in mind both where those levels are, and be aware of, what's going on a state level, as well as local. And if you're interested in change, again, I would just say to look around, see what people are doing, and get involved with people that are fighting for looking for the same types of goal solutions and programs that you are, and get involved with them.
Fantastic.
I had one thing that I wanted to say too, because several of our attorneys with our NAACP took an overview look at that HB 415, and there's some things in there that a lot of people don't really understand. And so we had our attorneys look at that and break it down, because people, they still can do a citizens review board. In fact, South Salt Lake, the mayor Wood was looking at implementing one in hers within the last several months. And so there are some of the ones that's already looking at it. For instance, West Valley have had theirs, and it's still in existence. And it's been probably over 25 years at least. And then Salt Lake City, of course, they have one. The other folks, they can do and get their citizens review boards, but they do need to speak and work with the city council, work with the mayors, and go ahead and start one. But it's just stipulations on those HB 415 that we broke things down where people can look at. One of the things that we didn't want is that the citizens review boards being able to hire and fire a chief. We don't think that that should be done either. And so, but the other things are in place.
Thank you, Jeanette. We are out of time for this conversation.
Yeah.
Do you have one quick?
Do we have one quick second?
One quick thing.
I'll go really fast because House Bill 415 has been talked about quite a bit, and I think even Rita made the comment that why did the chief support it? The primary reason the chief supported that bill is it would prevent the defunding, taking the money away from police. If it had only been about civilian review boards, we've supported that as an association. As Jeanetta mentioned, we have cities that have civilian review boards. There's a lot of different, whether advisory boards, review boards, steering committees, there's multiple ways you can do that. But it was the funding issue. When we're fighting to try to employ officers, everyone admits that we don't pay our officers enough. I hear that all the time, everywhere we go. And that's true, we don't. But so when you're sending a message that sounds like we're going to take more money away from police, of course we're going to be concerned about that. And that was the driver for the chiefs of police and I believe other law enforcement to support that.
Okay, thank you, Chief Ross. It's 8 o'clock. We obviously there's a lot more stuff that we can have a conversation about. We are just getting started here. So I want to extend to everyone who joined us this evening a huge thank you. And to let you know that if you submitted questions either through your RSVP for this event or through the Q&A, we're gathering all of those issues, those things that people are talking about and having questions around, and we will definitely use this for our future events and our future conversations around policing reform going forward. I'd like to just say a deep, sincere thank you to our panelists for joining us this evening and for this conversation. I really appreciate your openness and willingness to be part of this, and hopefully this just continues with all of you and with the people that we also engage for future conversations. I think this is a great step in the right direction. And I also, of course, want to thank our co-sponsoring organizations. So along with the League of Women Voters, we've also had the Better Utah Institute, the ACLU of Utah, Action Utah, the NAACP of Salt Lake, and the Utah Black Roundtable. So thank you all for sponsoring this event. And please look for us, after the election. We definitely would like to do another one and into the legislative season going forward. So I really appreciate you joining us, our panelists and our audience. Thank you so much and have a great evening.